The sun bore down on Cedar Ridge like a branding iron against flesh, turning the dusty Main Street into a shimmering mirage. Wade Thatcher squinted against the glare as he dismounted his stallion outside the general store, his spurs jangling in the oppressive silence of midday. The town seemed to hold its breath in the heat, save for the occasional whinny from the livery stable and the creak of wood expanding under the merciless sun. At 43, Wade cut an imposing figure against the weathered storefront. Years of working the land had carved deep lines around his steel-gray eyes and bronzed his skin to leather. His broad shoulders strained against the fabric of his work shirt, and his hands, calloused from countless hours of rope work, betrayed a life of honest labor. Yet for all his physical presence, there was a hollowness in his gaze that spoke of nights spent staring at empty chairs and cold beds. The bell above the door announced his entrance, drawing the attention of Samuel Morrison, the shopkeeper who'd known Wade since he'd first claimed his land 15 years prior. "Afternoon, Wade." Samuel nodded, wiping his hands on his apron. "Hot enough to fry eggs on a rock out there." "That it is," Wade replied, his voice gravelly from dust and disuse. He moved through the store with purpose, gathering supplies with the efficiency of a man who valued time over pleasantries. "Heard from Doc Peterson you're finally taking another wife," Samuel ventured, arranging canned goods on a shelf. "About time, if you don't mind me saying. A man needs sons to carry on his name." Wade's jaw tightened. The whole damn town seemed to have opinions about his personal affairs since Martha had succumbed to consumption 2 winters past. Every Sunday after church, the matrons would corner him with their suggestions and sympathies, their daughters conveniently nearby, scrubbed and presented like prize heifers at auction. "Placed an advertisement back east," Wade said curtly, selecting a new bridle from the wall. "Woman arrives on tomorrow's train." Samuel whistled low. "Mail order bride, eh? Risky business. That. Never know what you're getting." Wade had spent 3 months crafting that advertisement, each word chosen with the same care he used selecting breeding stock. "Established rancher seeks young woman of good health and moral character for matrimony. Must be willing to work hard and bear children. Comfortable home and security provided." Simple. Direct. No room for misunderstanding. The responses had trickled in, desperate tales of orphaned girls and widowed mothers. But one letter had stood out, written in elegant script on cream paper. Ruby Mae Dawson. The letter spoke of strength and determination, of a desire for honest work and a new beginning. She'd included no photograph, claiming modesty, but her words painted a picture of youth and vitality. 20 years old. She'd written, perfect for bearing the son Cedar Ridge expected of him. The next morning arrived with a dust devil dancing across the ranch yard. Wade had risen before dawn, as was his custom, but found himself taking unusual care with his appearance. He trimmed his beard, beat the dust from his best hat, and even polished his boots, actions that drew curious glances from his ranch hands. The train station buzzed with activity as the westbound locomotive announced its arrival with a shriek of steam. Wade stood apart from the crowd, his height allowing him clear view of the disembarking passengers. Families reunited with tears and laughter. Businessmen hurried past with leather cases. His eyes searched for a young woman alone, perhaps wearing her Sunday best, looking lost and innocent. Then he saw her. She emerged from the passenger car like a force of nature, her deep burgundy traveling dress clinging to curves that spoke of full womanhood, not girlish youth. The color alone marked her as different. The respectable women of Cedar Ridge favored browns and grays, colors that didn't draw attention, but this woman, she commanded it. Ruby Mae Dawson stood on the platform, one gloved hand shading her eyes as she surveyed the town. The afternoon sun caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair, which was swept up in a style more suited to a New Orleans parlor than a frontier town. She couldn't be 20. The laugh lines around her amber eyes and the confident set of her shoulders suggested at least 8 years more, maybe 10. Wade's first instinct was to turn and leave. He'd been deceived, made a fool of. But then her gaze found his across the platform, and something in those eyes, a challenge, perhaps, or simple recognition, held him in place. She approached with measured steps, her chin raised despite the disapproving stares from the townswomen already gathering to whisper behind their fans. When she stopped before him, Wade caught a whiff of her perfume, something exotic and unsuitable that made him think of jasmine and sin. "Mr. Thatcher, I presume." Her voice carried a slight southern drawl, honeyed but with an edge that suggested she'd used it to talk her way out of more than one tight spot. "You're not 20, he said flatly. Ruby's red lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And you're not the romantic poet your letter suggested. Seems we both took liberties with the truth." The crowd around them grew, drawn by the spectacle. Wade felt their judgment pressing against his back. This was not the biddable young bride they'd expected him to bring home. This was trouble in burgundy silk and French perfume. "The next train east leaves in 3 days, Wade said. "I'll pay for your ticket and lodging until then." How generous. Ruby shifted her carpet bag to her other hand, the movement drawing attention to the fullness of her figure. "But I didn't travel 2,000 miles to turn tail at the first sign of disappointment. I need to live. Mr. Thatcher, and you need someone to warm your bed. Shall we discuss terms? Or would you prefer to air our business here for your neighbor's entertainment?" Heat crept up Wade's neck, anger, embarrassment, and something else he refused to acknowledge. Around them, the crowd pretended to go about their business while hanging on every word. "The wagon's this way," he growled, reaching for her bags. The ride to the ranch passed in tense silence. Wade kept his eyes on the road while Ruby took in the landscape, endless stretches of grassland broken by mesas and the distant purple mountains. Occasionally, she would shift on the hard wooden seat, and Wade would catch another drift of that damnable perfume. The Rocking T Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of prime grazing land, with the main house sitting on a rise that commanded views in all directions. Wade had built it with his own hands, adding rooms as his fortune grew. It stood as testament to his success. 2 stories of solid timber with a wraparound porch and real glass windows shipped from Denver. "It's larger than I expected," Ruby observed as they pulled up to the front steps. "I'm a man of means, Miss Dawson, which is why I expected honesty in our arrangement." She climbed down from the wagon without waiting for his assistance, her boots raising small clouds of dust. "And would you have responded to my letter if I'd told the truth? 28-year-old woman with a past seeks escape to the frontier. How many offers do you think that would have received?" Wade hefted her trunk, surprised by its weight. Whatever else she'd lied about, she'd come prepared to stay. 28 or 20, doesn't matter now. You're not what I advertised for." "No," Ruby agreed, following him into the house. "I'm considerably more—" The interior was exactly what she'd expected, functional, masculine, and utterly devoid of a woman's touch. Heavy furniture dominated the front room, and a thin layer of dust covered surfaces that had been neglected since the last housekeeper quit. "Your room," Wade said, pushing open a door at the top of the stairs. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and window overlooking the corral. "Supper's at 6. We'll discuss your return journey then." Ruby set her carpetbag on the bed and turned to face him. In the confined space, Wade became acutely aware of their proximity, of the rise and fall of her breath, the defiant tilt of her chin. "I'm not going back," she said simply. "Whatever you decide, I'm not going back." Something in her voice, not desperation, exactly, but a steel determination, made Wade pause. He'd broken horses with that same look in their eyes, wild things that would die before submitting. The comparison disturbed him. "We'll see about that," he muttered, retreating from the room. Supper was a stilted affair. Wade's housekeeper, Maria, had prepared a simple meal of beef and beans before leaving for her own family. Ruby ate with surprising appetite for a woman who claimed refined origins, though she handled her silverware with practiced elegance. "You can cook?" Wade asked, breaking the silence. "Among other skills," Ruby replied, She'd changed from her traveling clothes into a simpler dress, though the deep green fabric still seemed too rich for ranch life. "I can keep house, tend a garden, and I'm not afraid of hard work, despite appearances." And children? The question hung heavy between them. Ruby's hand stilled on her water glass. "I'm healthy enough." "That's not what I asked." She met his gaze directly. "You want guarantees. Mr. Thatcher? Life doesn't offer them. Your first wife gave you no children, yet you married her for love. I'd wager you're seeking a broodmare now, not a wife. At least I'm honest about what this is." Wade pushed back from the table, chair scraping against the floor. "You don't know anything about my marriage?" "No," Ruby conceded. "But I know grief when I see it, and I know a man trying to fill an empty space with the wrong pieces." The truth of her words stung more than Wade cared to admit. He stalked to the cabinet where he kept his whiskey, pouring 2 fingers with hands that weren't quite steady. "I'll honor my original offer," he said, not turning around. 3 days lodging and a ticket back east, that's more than fair." He heard the rustle of her skirts as she rose, the soft pad of her feet crossing the floor. When he turned, she was at the door to the kitchen, silhouetted against the lamplight. "Your wife," Ruby said quietly. Did she love this place? The question caught him off guard. Yes, she did. Then she wouldn't want to see it die with you." Ruby disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Wade alone with his whiskey and the growing certainty that nothing about his carefully ordered life would ever be the same. Later, as the moon painted silver streaks across the prairie, Ruby stood on the back porch, a borrowed shawl around her shoulders. She'd found a bottle of wine in the pantry, good wine, too good for this rough country, and poured herself a generous glass. The stars above were different from the ones she'd known in New Orleans, clearer and somehow more judgmental. From his bedroom window, Wade watched her. She moved with the careful grace of someone accustomed to being observed, but here, thinking herself alone. Something in her posture eased. She looked younger in the moonlight, and sadder too. Whatever had driven her to answer his advertisement, it hadn't been simple opportunism. He should send her away. She was too old, too worldly, too everything he hadn't wanted. But as she raised her face to the stars, something twisted in his chest, a recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit running from ghosts. Tomorrow, he told himself. He'd put her on the stage to Santa Fe tomorrow. But even as he thought it, Wade knew he was lying, just as she'd lied in her letter. And perhaps that was fitting. A marriage built on mutual deception. In a land that traded in hard truths and harder choices. The coyotes howled in the distance, their voices carrying across the desert like promises of trouble to come. Ruby finished her wine and went inside, leaving only the scent of jasmine and the certainty that Wade Thatcher's orderly existence had just been shattered by a woman in a burgundy dress who was nothing at all, like what he'd thought he wanted. The rooster's crow pierced the pre-dawn darkness, but Ruby was already awake, staring at the ceiling of the small room that had become her unexpected refuge. 3 days had passed since her arrival, and Wade had yet to mention the promised ticket back east. She'd taken this silence as tacit permission to stay, at least temporarily, and thrown herself into learning the rhythms of a ranch life. The first morning had been a disaster. She'd attempted to milk Bessie, the gentlest cow in Wade's modest dairy herd, only to be rewarded with a swift kick that sent the bucket flying and left her backside in the dust. Tom Garrett, the eldest ranch hand, had found her there, covered in dirt and spilled milk, cursing in a manner that would have scandalized the proper ladies of Cedar Ridge. "Ain't no shame in not knowing," Tom had said, offering a weathered hand to help her up. "But there's shame in not learning." So Ruby learned. She wrapped her soft hands around the rough rope until blisters formed, then burst, then formed again. She watched Maria demonstrate the proper way to bank a fire in the massive iron stove, how to tell when bread was ready by the sound of its crust, how to stretch a pound of flour into meals for hungry men. Her fine dresses remained packed while she donned simple calico and aprons that had belonged to Wade's late wife. Wade observed it all from a distance, appearing at meals and disappearing to the far corners of his land, as if putting physical space between them could ease the tension that crackled whenever they shared a room. But Ruby caught him watching sometimes, when she struggled with a butter churn, when she laughed at one of Tom's crude jokes, when she stood on the porch at sunset, unconsciously massaging her aching shoulders. On the fourth morning, Ruby rose before the rooster. She'd mastered the morning routine now. Fire first, coffee second, biscuits in the oven before the hands arrived seeking breakfast. She was elbow deep in dough when she heard boot steps on the porch, heavier than Tom's shuffling gait. "You're up early," Wade said from the doorway, his voice still rough with sleep. "Ranch life doesn't accommodate lazy habits." Ruby replied without turning, "Coffee's ready if you want it." She heard him move to the stove, the clink of tin against tin as he poured. The domesticity of the moment struck her as both false and oddly comfortable. This was what marriage looked like, wasn't it? Two people navigating around each other in the quiet hours before dawn. "Your hands," Wade said suddenly. Ruby looked down at her flour-covered fingers, the angry red blisters visible beneath the white dust. "They'll toughen up. Maria has salve in the pantry, calendula and beeswax." Before Ruby could respond, he'd set down his cup and disappeared into the storage room. He returned with a small tin, setting it on the counter near her elbow without comment. The gesture, small as it was, made her throat tight with an emotion she refused to examine. "Thank you," she managed. Wade grunted and returned to his coffee. They stood in companionable silence until the first rays of sun painted the kitchen golden, each lost in thoughts they weren't ready to share. The morning proceeded like any other until Tom appeared with news that scattered routine like startled quail. "Found tracks by the creek. Boss. Couple of steers missing from the south pasture. Looks like they were driven off, not wandered." Wade's expression darkened. Rustling was a hanging offense in cattle country, but catching the thieves required proof and often resulted in violence. "How many riders?" 3, maybe 4. Headed northwest toward the canyon lands. "Saddle Tempest, tell Miguel and Charlie we're riding out in 10 minutes. "I'm coming with you," Ruby announced, surprising everyone, including herself. Wade turned, his face a mask of incredulity. "Like hell you are. I can ride." It wasn't entirely a lie. She'd ridden in New Orleans, though side saddle in a manicured park was hardly preparation for pursuing cattle thieves across rough country. "This isn't some Sunday picnic. Woman, these men are dangerous." "Then you'll need all the help you can get." Ruby untied her apron with steady hands. "Unless you plan to leave the ranch undefended while you chase shadows through the canyon?" The logic was sound, though they both knew it was an excuse. Something reckless in Ruby wanted to prove herself beyond the kitchen and garden, to show she was more than a failed mail-order bride playing house. Wade looked ready to argue further when Tom intervened. "Could use an extra pair of eyes here, boss. Never know if them thieves might circle back while you're gone." It was a compromise that saved face for everyone. Wade nodded curtly and strode out, leaving Ruby with the bitter taste of exclusion and the growing determination to prove her worth on her own terms. The men rode out in a cloud of dust and purpose. Ruby watched from the porch until they disappeared over the rise, then turned her attention to the ranch, with most of the hands gone. Only Tom and young Jamie Morrison, Samuel's nephew, working to earn money for his own start in life, remained. Ruby threw herself into the day's chores with renewed vigor. She fed the chickens, gathered eggs, and even attempted to repair a broken fence rail near the vegetable garden. It was there, wrestling with a hammer that seemed determined to find her thumb instead of the nail, that she first noticed the rider approaching from the east. He was alone, which eased her immediate alarm, but something in his posture, too casual, too observant, made her wary. Ruby set down the hammer and walked to meet him at the gate, aware that her simple dress and work-roughened hands painted her as exactly what she was pretending to be, a rancher's wife. "Afternoon, ma'am." The stranger touched his hat brim. He was younger than Wade, perhaps 35, with the kind of looks that would have drawn second glances in any saloon. "I'm looking for Mr. Thatcher. Got business to discuss." "He's out on the range," Ruby replied. keeping her voice neutral. "Expected back by supper. You're welcome to wait." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Kind of you. Name's Jack Holloway. I'm interested in buying some cattle. Heard Thatcher had the best stock in the county." Ruby knew enough about ranch business to recognize a lie. Legitimate buyers didn't arrive unannounced, alone, while the owner was conveniently absent. But she smiled and played the gracious hostess, offering water for his horse and a seat on the porch. "You must be the new Mrs. Thatcher," Holloway said, accepting a glass of cool water. "Heard in town that Wade finally took another wife. News travels fast in Cedar Ridge." "That it does. Also heard you were quite the beauty. The gossips didn't exaggerate." Ruby felt the compliment slide over her like oil on water. She'd dealt with men like Holloway before, smooth talkers who viewed women as entertainment between schemes. "You're too kind, Mr. Holloway. Now, about those cattle." They spent an uncomfortable hour in stilted conversation, Holloway probing for information about the ranch's operations, while Ruby deflected with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to keeping secrets. The sun was beginning its descent when the sound of approaching horses ended their verbal dance. Wade appeared first, Tempest lathered with sweat and dust. His eyes found Holloway immediately, and something dangerous flickered across his face. "Jack," he said, dismounting with deliberate calm. "Bit far from your usual haunts." "Wade." Holloway stood, no longer the charming visitor. "Just discussing a little business with your lovely wife." "We don't have business, Jack. Not anymore." The tension between the men was palpable. Ruby recognized the signs of old conflict, the kind that festered in small communities where people couldn't escape their histories. She rose smoothly, inserting herself into the space between them. "Mr. Holloway was interested in purchasing cattle," she said. "I told him he'd need to discuss specifics with you." Wade's eyes flicked to her, a warning clear in their depths. "Mr. Holloway knows I don't sell to rustlers." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Holloway's hand drifted toward his hip, where a Colt revolver rested in worn leather. Ruby's heart hammered, but she forced herself to remain still, understanding instinctively that any sudden movement could spark violence. "Careful with your words, Thatcher," Holloway said softly. "A man's reputation is a fragile thing. So's his neck when it's in a noose." For a moment, Ruby thought Holloway would draw. Then he laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You always were a self-righteous bastard. Wade, no wonder you had to import a wife. No local woman would have you." He turned to Ruby, tipping his hat with mocking courtesy. "A pleasure, Mrs. Thatcher. I'm sure we'll meet again." They watched him ride away in silence. Only when he disappeared beyond the horizon did Ruby release the breath she'd been holding. "You know him," she said. It wasn't a question. "Used to ride for me. Caught him altering brands 2 years back." "Should have hanged him then, but you didn't." Wade's jaw tightened. "Martha asked me to show mercy. Said every man deserved a second chance." The mention of his late wife fell between them like a stone in still water. Ruby wanted to ask more about Martha, about Holloway, about the complex web of history that bound this place. But Wade was already walking away, the walls between them rebuilt with just one name. Supper was quiet, the men tired from their fruitless chase, and Wade lost in thoughts he didn't share. Ruby served and cleared in silence, playing the role expected of her while her mind churned with questions. Later, after the hands had retired to the bunkhouse and the dishes were done, she found herself alone with Wade on the porch. He sat in a rough-hewn chair, smoking a pipe and staring at stars that seemed close enough to touch. "I should have sent you away," he said suddenly. "First day. Should have put you on that stage regardless of what you wanted." Ruby settled onto the top step, her back against the porch post. "Why didn't you—" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "You reminded me of her. That first night. Not in looks. Martha was fair as morning, gentle as rain, but standing in the kitchen, talking about filling empty spaces with wrong pieces. She used to say things like that. things that cut straight to the truth of a matter. She sounds like a wise woman. She was better than wise. She was good, pure good, through and through. Wade's voice roughened. Died trying to give me the child everyone says I need. Doctor said her lungs were too weak, the consumption too advanced. But she tried anyway. Ruby absorbed this pain, adding it to her own collection of griefs. I'm sorry. Are you? Wade's gaze found hers in the darkness. Or are you glad? Without her death, you wouldn't be here. The cruelty of the question should have stung. Instead, Ruby found herself considering it honestly. I think two things can be true at once. I can be sorry for your loss and grateful for my chance, just as you can mourn your wife and still need to live. Wade made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. You're not what I wanted, Ruby Dawson. No, she agreed. But maybe I'm what you need. The night stretched between them, full of possibilities and impossibilities in equal measure. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and its mate answered. Ruby rose, understanding that some conversations could only go so far before they broke under their own weight. Good night, Wade. She was at the door when his voice stopped her. The hands are driving cattle to the water station tomorrow. Someone needs to go to town for supplies. You could... That is, if you wanted. Ruby smiled in the darkness. I'll make a list tonight. It was a small thing, this tentative trust. But as Ruby climbed the stairs to her room, she felt something shift in the space between them. Not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of possibility. She paused at the window, looking out at the vast Texas night. Tomorrow, she would go to town and face the whispers and stares of people who'd already judged her. She'd proven she could work the ranch, but could she navigate the more treacherous waters of social acceptance? Only one way to find out. The moon rose full and bright, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. Ruby unpinned her hair, letting it fall in waves around her shoulders. In the morning, she'd pin it back up, don the mask of respectability, and venture into enemy territory armed with nothing but determination and a shopping list. But tonight, she allowed herself this moment of vulnerability, this admission that she was as lost and searching as the man downstairs wrestling with his ghosts. They were two damaged souls trying to build something from broken pieces, and whether they succeeded or failed, at least they were no longer alone in the attempt. The coyotes sang again, closer now, and Ruby took it as a sign. Even predators needed companionship in the darkness. Even the wild things knew that survival sometimes meant accepting the unexpected, adapting to what was rather than mourning what should have been. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, for the first time since she'd fled New Orleans with blood on her conscience and fear at her heels, Ruby Mae Dawson felt something that might have been hope. The Harvest Festival preparations had transformed Cedar Ridge from a dusty frontier town into something almost festive. Bunting stretched between buildings, and the smell of baking pies drifted from every household. Ruby guided the wagon down Main Street, acutely aware of the eyes that followed her progress. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival, and while she'd found her rhythm at the ranch, the town remained hostile territory. Whispers followed her like tumbleweeds, speculation about her past, her age, the impropriety of her sudden appearance. The respectable women of Cedar Ridge had closed ranks against the outsider who dared to arrive in burgundy silk at Morrison's general store. Ruby consulted her list while Samuel tallied her purchases. The man was polite but distant, speaking only when necessary. It was his wife, Eleanor, who broke the careful silence. Mrs. Thatcher. Eleanor Morrison emerged from behind the fabric counter, her pressed gray dress and severe bun marking her as a pillar of propriety. How unexpected to see you in town. Ruby straightened, meeting the woman's cold gaze. The ranch needs supplies. Mrs. Morrison, I'm sure you understand the demands of maintaining a household. Indeed. Eleanor's smile could have curdled milk. Though I dare say your previous establishments operated rather differently than our Christian homes. The accusation hung between them like a gauntlet thrown. Ruby felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. I'm not sure what you're implying. Oh, I think you do. Eleanor stepped closer, lowering her voice. Did you think we wouldn't ask questions? A woman of your age, arriving alone, with Theatre Rouge still clinging to your cheeks. We know your type. Miss Dawson, Wade Thatcher may be blinded by loneliness, but the good women of this town see clearly. That's enough, Eleanor. Samuel's voice cut through the tension. The lady's money spends as good as anyone's. Eleanor retreated, but her parting look promised this was far from over. Ruby completed her purchases in silence, her hands trembling slightly as she signed the credit slip. Outside, she loaded the wagon with mechanical precision, refusing to show how deeply the encounter had cut. She was adjusting the canvas cover when a gentle voice startled her. Don't mind Eleanor Morrison. She's been sour as pickles since her eldest ran off with that traveling photographer. Ruby turned to find a young woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. Mary Sullivan, the baker's wife, barely older than 25 herself. Mrs. Sullivan, Ruby said carefully. Mary, please. She glanced around, then stepped closer. Not all of us judge so harshly. Some of us understand that people come west for all sorts of reasons, and it's not our place to condemn. The unexpected kindness threatened Ruby's composure more than Eleanor's cruelty had. Thank you, she managed. The Harvest Festival is Saturday, Mary continued. You'll be attending with Mr. Thatcher? We haven't discussed it. Well, you should. Show them you're not afraid. Besides, Mary's eyes sparkled with mischief. I'd love to see Eleanor's face when you dance with the most eligible widower in the county. Ruby found herself smiling despite everything. You make it sound like battle strategy. Isn't it? Mary squeezed her arm. Wear something beautiful. Give them something else to talk about besides speculation. As Mary hurried back to the bakery, Ruby felt a spark of determination reignite. She'd fled New Orleans in defeat, but she'd be damned if she'd let a handful of bitter gossips drive her away again. The ride back to the ranch gave her time to plan. She did have one dress suitable for such an occasion, amber silk that complemented her coloring and emphasized her figure without being scandalous. It had been expensive, purchased in better days, but she'd kept it as a reminder of who she'd been before everything went wrong. Wade was in the corral working a young mare when she returned. Ruby watched him from the wagon seat, admiring the easy grace with which he moved, the gentle firmness of his hands on the reins. He'd removed his shirt in the heat, and the sight of his broad back, marked with old scars and new muscle, stirred something in her that had nothing to do with domestic arrangements. Need help unloading? Tom appeared at her elbow, breaking the spell. Thank you, Tom. Ruby climbed down, smoothing her skirts. Is there a particular dress code for the Harvest Festival? Tom's weathered face creased in surprise. You're thinking of going? Shouldn't I? Well, sure, but he scratched his grizzled beard. Boss hasn't attended since Mrs. Martha passed. Figured he'd skip this year, too. Ruby considered this as they carried supplies into the kitchen. Wade avoiding social gatherings made sense. Grief was a private thing, and the pressure to remarry must have been unbearable. But hiding away only fed the gossip's fire. That evening, she broached the subject over dinner. The town's preparing for the Harvest Festival. Wade's fork paused halfway to his mouth. That so? Mary Sullivan seemed to think we'd be attending together. Mary Sullivan should mind her own business. Ruby set down her water glass with deliberate care. Are you ashamed of me? The question cracked like a whip. Wade's head snapped up, his eyes darkening. What? It's a simple question. Are you ashamed to be seen with me in public? Because if this arrangement is going to work, we need to present a united front. This arrangement? Wade pushed back from the table. Is that what we're calling it? What would you prefer? Our sham, our business transaction? At least I'm honest about what this is. Honest? Wade laughed bitterly. You lied from your first letter, and you're lying now, to yourself and everyone else. Hiding out here, letting the town think whatever they want about me while you play the grieving widower. I am a grieving widower. Yes, you are, but you're also a living man who made a choice. You wrote that advertisement. You accepted my presence here. Now you need to decide. Am I your wife in name only, hidden away like a shameful secret? Or are we going to try to build something real? The silence stretched between them, taut as fence wire. Wade stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, Ruby thought he would storm out as he usually did when conversations veered too close to truth. Instead, he moved to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. Martha loved the Harvest Festival. She'd spend weeks planning her pie entries, stitching new ribbons on her bonnet. The year before the end, she was too weak to dance, but she made me promise to attend anyway, to not let her illness steal all our joy. Ruby remained silent. Understanding this was more than he'd shared with anyone. I couldn't face it last year, the thought of all those pitying looks, the matchmaking attempts. He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. It won't be easy. Eleanor Morrison's already been spreading her poison, I'm sure. I've faced worse than Eleanor Morrison. Something in her tone must have conveyed more than she intended, because Wade's gaze sharpened, but he didn't press. Instead, he nodded slowly. Saturday, then we'll give them something new to gossip about. The days leading to the festival passed in a blur of preparation. Ruby threw herself into baking, determined to show the town she could hold her own in domestic arts. Her first attempt at apple pie was a disaster, the crust tough as leather and the filling soupy, but Tom, bless him, ate 2 slices and declared it interesting, which made her laugh despite her frustration. By the 3rd attempt, she'd found her rhythm. The pies cooling on the windowsill looked almost professional, and the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and home. Wade found her there Friday evening, flour in her hair and triumph in her eyes. Success? He asked, eyeing the golden crusts. Maybe. Hopefully, we'll find out tomorrow when I'm compared to every other woman in the county. You don't have to prove anything to them. Ruby wiped her hands on her apron, considering her words. No, but I need to prove something to myself, that I can do this, be this person, a rancher's wife, a respectable woman, that I can leave the past where it belongs. Wade moved closer, and for a moment Ruby thought he might touch her. Instead, he reached past her for one of the cooling pies, inhaling deeply. Smells like Martha's recipe. Maria taught me, said it was her grandmother's before that. Tradition, Wade murmured. This place runs on it. He met her eyes. You know they'll test you tomorrow. The women especially. They protect their own. And right now, you're not one of them. Then I'll have to change their minds. It's not that simple. Ruby, you can't just... He stopped, frustration clear in the set of his shoulders. Can't just what? Can't overcome my past? Can't make them accept me? Ruby's chin lifted defiantly. Watch me. Saturday dawned clear and bright, the October air crisp with the promise of autumn. Ruby took extra care with her appearance, pinning her hair in a softer style than usual and letting Mary's advice guide her choices. The amber silk dress fit perfectly, its warm color complementing her skin and bringing out the gold flecks in her eyes. When she descended the stairs, Wade was waiting in his best suit black wool that emphasized his broad shoulders and made his silver-touched hair gleam. He'd trimmed his beard and even polished his boots to a shine. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, 2 people playing dress-up in roles they weren't sure how to inhabit. You look... Wade cleared his throat. That dress suits you. You clean up well yourself, Mr. Thatcher. He offered his arm, formally, as if they were strangers at a ball rather than 2 people who'd been circling each other warily for weeks. Ruby accepted it, noting how her hand seemed to fit naturally in the crook of his elbow. The festival grounds buzzed with activity. Booths lined the main square, offering everything from preserves to quilts. Children ran between the displays, their laughter bright as bells. The smell of roasting meat and fresh bread made Ruby's stomach rumble despite her nerves. Their arrival caused a visible ripple through the crowd. Conversations paused, heads turned, and Ruby felt the weight of every stare. She kept her spine straight, her smile pleasant, drawing on every lesson learned in more dangerous rooms than this. "Wade," Mayor Hutchins approached, his political smile firmly in place. "Good to see you out and about. And this must be the new Mrs. Thatcher. Miss Dawson." Ruby corrected gently. "We haven't formalized the arrangement yet." The mayor's eyebrows rose, but he recovered quickly. Of course. Well, welcome to Cedar Ridge, Miss Dawson. I trust you're finding our town hospitable." Before Ruby could form a diplomatic response, Eleanor Morrison materialized like a bad omen. "Mayor Hutchins, surely you're not endorsing this irregular situation?" "Now, Eleanor," the mayor began. But Eleanor was already in full righteousness mode. "It's unseemly. An unmarried woman living with a man, flaunting herself at our family gathering. What kind of example does that set for our daughters?" A crowd was gathering, drawn by the promise of drama. Ruby felt Wade tense beside her, ready to intervene, but she pressed his arm gently. This was her battle. "Mrs. Morrison," Ruby said, her voice carrying clearly, "I understand your concerns. A mother's duty to protect her children's innocence is sacred. I'm sure that's why you work so hard to shield them from gossip, unkindness, and the tendency to judge others without knowing their circumstances." Eleanor's face flushed. "How dare you?" "I dare because I must." Ruby stepped forward, addressing the growing crowd. "Yes, I came here through unconventional means. Yes, I'm older than the bride Mr. Thatcher advertised for, but I came honestly, seeking honest work and a chance at a respectable life. If that offends you, perhaps you should examine why." "Examine why?" Eleanor sputtered. "You arrived from God knows where, with your city airs and theatrical clothes. From New Orleans," Ruby interrupted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Where I nursed yellow fever victims until the hospital closed. Where I watched good people die because they couldn't afford a doctor's care. Where I learned that life is too short and too precious to waste on petty judgments." The lie came so easily. It felt like truth. In the crowd, she saw Mary Sullivan nodding approvingly, and a few other women looking thoughtful rather than hostile. Wade stepped forward then, his presence solid as an oak. "Miss Dawson has proven herself at the ranch. She works harder than any woman I've known save my late wife. If the people of Cedar Ridge can't see past their assumptions to the person she is, that's their loss." The declaration rang across the square. Ruby felt something shift in the atmosphere. Not acceptance, not yet, but a crack in the wall of hostility. Eleanor opened her mouth for another salvo, but her husband Samuel touched her arm. "Come, dear, our booth needs tending." As the crowd dispersed, murmuring among themselves, Mary Sullivan approached with a warm smile. "That was beautifully done. Eleanor's been queen bee too long. About time someone stood up to her." She winked at Wade. "The dancing starts at sunset. I expect to see you both there." The rest of the afternoon passed more peacefully. Ruby entered her pies in the contest, helped at the church's charity booth, and slowly, carefully, began conversations with the women who seemed less hostile. She spoke of recipes and gardening, of the challenges of ranch life, ordinary things that built bridges one mundane detail at a time. Wade stayed close, his presence a silent support that meant more than any words. When the pie judging came, Ruby's entry earned an honorable mention, not a victory, but respectable enough to prove she belonged. As the sun began its descent, lanterns were lit around the dance floor, the fiddlers tuned their instruments, and couples began to gather. Ruby and Wade stood at the edge, watching others take their places. "I should warn you," Wade said quietly. "I haven't danced since Martha." Ruby finished. "It's all right. We don't have to." But the music had started, a slow waltz that seemed to pull at something deep in Wade's chest. He held out his hand, formal as a stranger. "Miss Dawson, would you honor me with this dance?" Ruby placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses and strength there. "The honor is mine, Mr. Thatcher." They moved onto the floor. aware of every eye upon them. Wade's hand found her waist. Proper distance maintained between their bodies, but as they began to move, something shifted. The hostility of the crowd, the weight of the past, even the uncertain future, it all faded beneath the simple rhythm of the dance. Wade was a surprisingly good dancer, leading with quiet confidence. Ruby followed, letting muscle memory from another life guide her steps. Around them, other couples swirled, but Ruby was aware only of Wade's hand in hers, the warmth of him, the way his eyes never left her face. "They're all watching," he murmured. "Let them watch," Ruby replied. "Give them the show they want." Something sparked in Wade's eyes, challenge, perhaps, or recognition. He pulled her closer, still proper but intimate enough to set tongues wagging. Ruby's breath caught as she looked up at him, seeing not the grieving widower or the bitter rancher, but a man complicated, damaged, but undeniably alive. "You want me to own you like property?" she said softly, echoing words she'd thought but never spoken. "But I'm fire, Wade Thatcher. Can you handle the heat?" His hand tightened on her waist, and for a moment, she thought he might kiss her there in front of everyone. Instead, he leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "We'll see, won't we?" The promise in those words sent heat racing through her that had nothing to do with exertion. They finished the dance in charged silence, both aware they'd crossed some invisible line. As the music ended and they parted, applause rippled through the crowd, some genuine, some merely polite. But Ruby had made her point. She was here, she was staying, and she wouldn't be intimidated. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dances and conversations. Some women remained cold, but others began to thaw, by the time the harvest moon rose full and orange above the town. Ruby had received 2 invitations to quilting circles and a recipe for pickled peaches from the banker's wife. The ride home was quiet, both lost in thought. The ranch house stood silent in the moonlight, familiar now in a way that surprised Ruby. Somewhere in the past weeks, this had become home. "Thank you," she said as Wade helped her from the wagon, "for standing by me today. You didn't need me. You handled Eleanor Morrison like you were born to it. Maybe, but having you there, it mattered." They stood in the yard, neither moving toward the house. The air between them crackled with possibility and danger in equal measure. "Ruby," Wade began, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. "What you said about being fire, it was just talk, heat of the moment." "Was it?" He stepped closer, and Ruby's pulse quickened. "Because I think you meant every word, just like I think there's more to your story than nursing fever victims in New Orleans." Ruby's heart hammered against her ribs. "We all have our secrets, Wade." "Yes," he agreed. "We do." For a long moment, they stood frozen, balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Then Wade stepped back, breaking the spell. "It's late. Morning comes early." Ruby nodded, not trusting her voice. She moved toward the house on unsteady legs, aware of his gaze following her. At the door, she turned back. "Wade, what we're building here, is it real?" He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, quietly, "I don't know, but maybe that's enough for now." It wasn't a declaration of love or even affection, but as Ruby climbed the stairs to her room, she thought it might be something better: honesty. 2 damaged people admitting they didn't have answers, but willing to search for them together. Outside her window, the harvest moon painted the landscape in silver and shadow. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests from the town and from each other. But tonight, she'd danced in Wade Thatcher's arms and felt, for just a moment, like she belonged. Ruby unpinned her hair, humming the waltz under her breath. The woman in the mirror looked different somehow, softer, perhaps, or simply more at peace. Whatever happened next, she'd proven she could stand her ground. The rest would come in time. Or it wouldn't, but either way, she was done running. The morning after the harvest festival dawned cold and bright. but the chill in the air was nothing compared to the ice that had formed between Ruby and Wade. He'd retreated behind his walls again, disappearing before dawn to work the farthest corners of the ranch. Ruby threw herself into household tasks with vicious energy, scrubbing floors that were already clean and beating rugs that didn't need it. 3 days passed in this careful dance of avoidance. They spoke only when necessary, passing each other like ghosts in the house they shared but didn't inhabit together. Ruby told herself it was better this way. Cleaner, simpler, less likely to end in the kind of disaster that had driven her from New Orleans. But at night, when sleep eluded her, she remembered the weight of his hand at her waist, the promise in his voice when he'd said, "We'll see." The memory tormented her as much as any ghost from her past. It was Tom who finally broke the stalemate, cornering Ruby in the garden where she was attacking weeds with unnecessary violence. "Whatever fool thing the boss did, you might consider forgiving him," the old ranch hand said without preamble. "Man's been alone too long to remember how to act around a woman who matters." Ruby sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow. "What makes you think I matter?" Tom snorted. "Girl, I've worked this ranch since Wade was green as spring grass. Never seen him look at Martha the way he looks at you when he thinks nobody's watching." "That's ridiculous. Martha was his wife, his love." "Martha was a good woman, God rest her. But she was chosen for him by their families when they were barely old enough to know their own minds. They grew to care for each other." "Sure enough, but you?" Tom shook his head. "You chose each other. Messy as it's been, that's different." Before Ruby could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. A rider was coming hard from the direction of town, and even at a distance, Ruby could see the urgency in his posture. It was Jamie Morrison, Samuel's nephew, his young face tight with worry. "Miss Ruby, where's Mr. Thatcher? There's a stranger in town asking questions about you." Ruby's blood turned to ice. "What kind of questions?" "About where you came from. If you're really who you say. He's been buying drinks at the saloon, getting folks talking." Jamie dismounted, fidgeting with his reins. "Said his name's Virgil Dunn. Claims he knows you from before." The garden tools slipped from Ruby's numb fingers. Virgil Dunn, a name from her nightmares, from the blood-soaked room in New Orleans where everything had gone wrong. She'd thought herself beyond his reach here, but the past, it seemed, had longer arms than the frontier was wide. "Where's Wade?" she managed, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. "South pasture, checking the water tanks." Tom answered, already moving toward the horses. "I'll fetch him." "No." Ruby stood, brushing dirt from her skirts with shaking hands. "No, this is my problem. I'll handle it." But even as she said it, she knew the truth. There was no handling Virgil Dunn. He was a snake in human form, a man who collected secrets like other men collected coins and spent them just as freely when it suited his purposes. Ruby went into the house, her mind racing. She could run, saddle a horse, and disappear into the vast Texas wilderness before Virgil found his way to the ranch. But running meant leaving Wade to face questions he couldn't answer, abandoning the life she'd begun to build here. Her hands moved automatically, packing a small bag with the essentials, money she'd saved from the household accounts, a change of clothes, the few pieces of jewelry that had survived her flight from New Orleans. She was fastening the clasp when she heard boots on the porch, not Wade's measured tread, but something heavier, more deliberate. Virgil Dunn stood in her kitchen like a bad memory made flesh. He was unchanged, still handsome in the way that made good women stupid and smart women wary, with dark hair slicked back and clothes that cost too much for honest work. "Ruby, Ruby," he drawled, helping himself to a seat at her scrubbed table. "You've done well for yourself. From sporting house to respectable ranch. Quite the transformation. Get out." Ruby's hand found the knife she'd been using to pare apples, gripping it beneath the fold of her apron. "Now, is that any way to greet an old friend? After I've come all this way to check on your welfare?" Virgil's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Imagine my surprise when I heard Ruby Mae Dawson, who we both know died in that unfortunate fire, was alive and well in Texas, playing house with a rich rancher. What do you want? Direct as always. I admired that about you. He leaned back, studying her with calculating eyes. What I want is simple. Your rancher has money, and I have debts. Significant debts to people who express their disappointment in painful ways. Wade won't pay your blackmail. No, not even to protect his precious reputation. The man who advertised for a pure young bride, saddled instead with a... He paused, savoring the moment. Witness to murder? Or should I say, accessory? Ruby's knees threatened to buckle, but she forced herself to remain standing. I didn't kill anyone. No, but you were there. You saw what happened to poor Marcus Beaumont, and then you ran, which looks so guilty, doesn't it? Especially when the New Orleans police would love to close that case. You killed him, Ruby said flatly. Shot him in cold blood when you found out he'd been skimming from the house take. Prove it. Virgil's confidence was absolute. My word against yours. And who are you? A woman of questionable morals who fled the scene of a crime, while I'm a respectable businessman with friends in useful places. The sound of horses in the yard made them both turn. Wade's voice carried through the window, giving orders to the hands. Ruby's heart clenched. In moments, he would walk through that door and her carefully constructed new life would shatter. $5,000, Virgil said quickly. That's all. 5,000, and I disappear forever. You can keep playing pioneer wife. And I'll forget I ever knew Ruby Mae Dawson. I don't have that kind of money. But he does. Virgil stood as footsteps approached the porch. Think fast, Ruby. Tell him the truth and watch him turn away in disgust, or pay my price and keep your secrets. Your choice. Wade entered the kitchen, his presence filling the space. His eyes went immediately to Virgil, then to Ruby's pale face, and his expression darkened. Who are you? The question came out sharp as a blade. Virgil extended his hand with false bonhomie. Virgil Dunn, Mr. Thatcher. I'm an old acquaintance of your charming companion here. We have some business to discuss. Wade ignored the offered hand. Any business you have with Miss Dawson, you have with me. How touching. Virgil's smile widened. Ruby always did inspire protection in men. It's a gift, really. Get to the point or get out. Ruby watched it all with a strange sense of detachment, as if she were floating above her body, observing the destruction of everything she'd built. She could see the moment coming. Virgil's revelation, Wade's disgust, her own inevitable exile. Wade, she said quietly, I need to tell you something. Both men turned to her, Virgil with predatory interest, Wade with guarded concern. I knew Mr. Dunn in New Orleans, she began, each word feeling like ground glass in her throat. I wasn't a nurse in a hospital. I worked in a sporting house as a bookkeeper, she added quickly, seeing Wade's face change. Managing accounts, keeping the girls' earnings straight. It was honest work, even if the establishment wasn't. Wade said nothing, his silence more damning than any accusation. There was a man, Marcus Beaumont. He managed the house's finances, skimmed from the profits. When the owner found out, Ruby's voice caught. I was in the office that night, finishing the ledgers. I heard the argument, the gunshot. I saw... She saw justice done to a thief. Virgil interrupted smoothly. Unfortunately, the police might view it differently. Murder is such an ugly word, isn't it? You're blackmailing her. Wade's voice was flat, emotionless. Such a crude term. I prefer to think of it as a business arrangement, a small investment to protect everyone's interests. Wade moved then, faster than Ruby would have thought possible for such a large man. His fist connected with Virgil's jaw with a crack that echoed through the kitchen. Virgil went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. Get up, Wade said calmly. Get up and get off my land before I forget I'm trying to be civilized. Virgil struggled to his feet, dabbing at his nose with a handkerchief that quickly turned red. You just made a serious mistake. Thatcher, I'll have the law on you for assault. Try it. Wade's smile was cold as winter wind. Sheriff Coleman's an old friend. He'll be real interested to hear about a New Orleans criminal threatening decent folk. Criminal? I've done nothing. Yet, but men like you always have dirt that won't wash clean. I'd bet my ranch that badge in New Orleans would love to know where to find you. Wade stepped closer, looming over the smaller man. Here's your choice. Done. Leave now. Forget you ever heard the name Ruby Dawson. And maybe I forget to wire New Orleans about your visit, or stay, and I'll make it my personal mission to see you hang for whatever crimes you're running from. Virgil's face cycled through rage, calculation, and finally, grudging defeat. You don't know who you're protecting, what she's capable of. I know enough. Wade opened the door. A clear dismissal. Tom will escort you to the property line. If I see you again, I'll assume you're here to steal cattle and act accordingly. The threat was clear. In Texas, cattle rustling was a hanging offense, and frontier justice didn't always wait for judges. Virgil left without another word, though the look he shot Ruby promised this wasn't over. She stood frozen as Wade closed the door, as the sound of horses faded into distance, as silence settled over the kitchen like a shroud. It's true, then, Wade said finally, not looking at her. All of it. Not all. Ruby's voice was barely a whisper. I didn't know anyone was going to die. I was just trying to earn enough money to start over somewhere clean. When I heard the shot, saw the blood, I ran. Like a coward, I ran. To here. To you. The words hung between them, fragile as spun glass. I answered your advertisement because I was desperate. Yes, but also because something in your letter spoke of honesty, of building something real. I thought maybe, if I could just get far enough away, I could become the woman you were looking for. Wade turned then, and the look in his eyes made her heart shatter. The woman I was looking for didn't exist. I see that now. Wade, I need time to think. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. That man, Dunn. Will he come back? Probably. He's like a dog with a bone when he scents profit. Then we'll deal with it. Wade's shoulders straightened. Whatever else you are, you're under my protection now. I gave my word when I let you stay, and I don't break my word. Even for a liar? A woman with blood on her conscience? Wade was quiet for a long moment. We've all got blood on our conscience. Ruby, the question is, what we do after. He left then, and Ruby sank into a chair, her legs finally giving out. She'd told the truth, or most of it, and Wade hadn't thrown her out, but the distance between them, already significant, now seemed vast as the Texas sky. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, matching the turmoil in her heart. She'd come to Texas seeking redemption, a chance to bury her past and build something new. Instead, the past had followed her, threatening not just her own future, but Wade's as well. Ruby looked at the bag she'd packed, still sitting on the table. The smart thing would be to leave, to spare Wade further trouble, but when had she ever done the smart thing? No, she decided. Unpacking the bag with steady hands, she'd stay and face whatever came next. Virgil Dunn might think he owned her secrets, but he'd forgotten one thing. Ruby Mae Dawson was a survivor. She'd survived New Orleans, survived the journey west, survived the hostile town and her own broken heart. She'd survive this too. Somehow. And maybe, if there was any justice in this harsh land, she'd find a way to make Wade understand that beneath all the lies lay one essential truth. She was falling in love with him. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first fat raindrops splattered against the windows. Ruby rose to secure the shutters, preparing for the storm. Whatever happened next, she'd meet it head on. No more running, no more lies, just the truth, complicated and messy as it was, and the hope that love might be stronger than the shadows of the past. The storm broke with violent fury, but Ruby stood firm, watching lightning split the sky and thinking of Wade somewhere out in the tempest, wrestling with his own demons. They were quite a pair, she thought with bitter humor. A grieving widower and a fallen woman, trying to build something clean from soiled materials. But maybe that was the point. Maybe redemption wasn't about being perfect or pure. Maybe it was about choosing to be better than your worst moment. About fighting for something worth saving, even when the odds were against you. The rain pounded harder, but Ruby didn't flinch. She'd weathered worse storms than this. And if Wade Thatcher couldn't accept her past, well, she'd survive that too. But God, she hoped she wouldn't have to. The storm that broke over Cedar Ridge that night was the worst in memory. By morning, when Wade hadn't returned, Ruby's worry overcame her hurt pride. She found Tom in the barn, already saddling horses. "Figured you'd want to go looking," the old hand said without preamble. "Boss headed toward Devil's Canyon before the storm hit. Fool thing to do, but he wasn't in a listening mood." Ruby was already reaching for her riding clothes. "How many men can you spare?" "Just me and Miguel. Others are dealing with the flooding in the lower pasture." Tom's weathered face was grim. "That canyon's a death trap in weather like this. Flash floods, rock slides. Then we'd better hurry." They rode out into a world transformed by the storm's fury. The familiar landscape was alien now. Arroyos turned to raging rivers, trails washed away, landmarks obscured by debris. Ruby had learned to ride properly in the weeks at the ranch, but this tested every skill she'd gained. "Why Devil's Canyon?" she shouted over the wind that still howled across the mesa. "He goes there when he needs to think," Tom replied. "There's a line shack about halfway up. If he's smart, he holed up there." But Wade hadn't made it to the line shack. They found Tempest first, the stallion standing guard over his master's still form at the base of a washed-out trail. Wade lay crumpled among the rocks, his left arm bent at an unnatural angle, blood seeping from a gash on his temple. Ruby was off her horse before Tom could stop her, slipping and sliding down the muddy slope. "Wade!" She dropped to her knees beside him, fingers searching for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. His eyes fluttered open at her touch. "Ruby?" His voice was barely a whisper. "You came." "Of course I came, you fool man." Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks as she cradled his head. "Did you think I'd let you die out here alone? Might be easier for you," he managed, wincing as he tried to move. "Don't you dare," Ruby said fiercely. "Don't you dare give up on me now." Tom and Miguel reached them, immediately assessing the situation with practiced eyes. "Arms broke, maybe ribs too," Tom diagnosed. "We need to get him somewhere dry before he takes fever." The line shack was closer than the ranch, but getting Wade there tested all their strength and ingenuity. They fashioned a travois from branches and blankets, every bump and jostle drawing groans from Wade despite his efforts to stay silent. Ruby walked beside him, holding his good hand, whispering encouragements and threats in equal measure. The shack was basic one room with a fireplace, a few supplies, and a narrow bunk. But it was dry and shelter from the wind that still howled outside. While Tom and Miguel tended the horses and gathered firewood, Ruby settled Wade on the bunk, cutting away his wet clothes with gentle efficiency. The full extent of his injuries made her stomach clench, beyond the broken arm and head wound. His torso was mottled with bruises where he'd struck rocks in his fall. She'd seen men die from less, especially when fever set in. "Tom," she called, "ride back for the doctor. Miguel can stay with me. In this weather, trail's near washed out. Then be careful, but go, fast as you can." Tom left without further argument, recognizing the command in her voice. Ruby turned back to Wade, who was watching her with eyes glazed with pain. "Bossy," he murmured. "Someone has to be." She began cleaning his wounds with water heated over the fire, trying to be gentle despite the urgency. "What were you thinking? Riding out in that storm?" "Wasn't thinking. Just needed space to figure things out." "And did you figure things out?" Wade was quiet so long she thought he'd passed out. "Then, Martha never lied to me. 20 years together. And I knew every thought in her head, every dream, every fear. It was safe." Ruby's hand stilled on the bandage she was wrapping. "And I'm not safe. No." His good hand found hers, gripping with surprising strength. "Your fire, remember? Beautiful and dangerous and nothing I expected. Wade, let me finish. Might not get another chance." He struggled to focus on her face. When Dunn was talking, all I could think was, you could have run. When you heard that shot, saw the blood, you could have grabbed what you could and disappeared. But you stayed to see if someone needed help. "I ran after," Ruby reminded him, her voice thick. "Like a coward. Like someone who wanted to live." Wade's thumb stroked across her knuckles. "Can't fault you for that. God knows I've wanted to run plenty of times. After Martha died, I thought about it, selling everything, heading further west where nobody knew my name or my grief. Why didn't you?" "Too stubborn, I guess. Or too afraid. Takes a different kind of courage to start over." His eyes drifted closed. "Should have told you, at the dance. Wanted to tell you." "Tell me what?" But Wade had slipped into unconsciousness, his breathing shallow but steady. The next hours were the longest of Ruby's life. She kept the fire burning, changed Wade's bandages, dripped water between his lips when he stirred. The storm gradually exhausted itself, leaving an eerie quiet broken only by the drip of water and Wade's labored breathing. As night fell, the fever came. Wade tossed restlessly, muttering broken phrases. Martha's name featured heavily, along with apologies Ruby couldn't fully understand. She bathed his face with cool water, sang half-remembered songs from her childhood. Anything to anchor him to life. "Don't leave me," she whispered, pressing her lips to his burning forehead. "I've lost too much already. I can't lose you too." Sometime near midnight, Wade's eyes opened, clearer than they'd been in hours. "Ruby, I'm here. Tell me about New Orleans. The truth this time. All of it." So she did, in the flickering firelight, with the storm's aftermath dripping from the eaves. Ruby told her whole story. Her father's gambling debts that had forced her into service. The sporting house where she'd learned to keep books because the owner saw she had a head for figures. Marcus Beaumont, who'd been kind at first, then greedy, then dead on the office floor with Virgil Dunn standing over him, smoke still rising from his pistol. He said if I told anyone, he'd swear I was his accomplice. Said the police would believe him over me, a respectable businessman versus a woman who worked in such a place. Ruby's voice was steady now, purged of shame by the telling. So I ran, took what money I'd saved and bought passage west, changed my name at the first stop. Been changing ever since, until here, until you. Wade listened without interrupting, his gaze never leaving her face. When she finished, he lifted his good hand to touch her cheek, catching a tear she didn't know had fallen. "No more running," he said softly. "What?" "For either of us. No more running from the past or the future or whatever this is between us." His voice grew stronger, more certain. "I'm not an easy man, Ruby. I'm set in my ways, still half in love with a ghost, and too old to change much. But I know one thing. When I thought I might die out there, the only face I wanted to see was yours." Ruby caught his hand, pressing it against her cheek. "Wade Thatcher, are you proposing to me while half dead from fever?" "Maybe. Would you say yes?" "Ask me when you're not delirious, and we'll see." A smile ghosted across his lips. "Fair enough." Miguel returned near dawn with news that Tom had made it through, but the doctor couldn't attempt the journey until the trails dried. He'd sent medicine and detailed instructions, which Ruby followed with the same intensity she'd once applied to Ledger's. Wade's fever broke the second day, leaving him weak but lucid. They talked through the long hours, about everything and nothing, learning each other in ways their careful dance at the ranch hadn't allowed. Ruby discovered Wade's dry sense of humor, his love of poetry that he hid from the hands, his dreams of breeding horses that could run like the wind. He learned about her childhood in Louisiana, her mother who died young, the books she'd read in stolen moments between work. On the third day, when the sun finally broke through the clouds, Wade tried the proposal again. "I'm not delirious now," he said as Ruby changed his bandages. "Weak as a newborn calf, maybe, but my mind's clear. And And I'm asking, not for a business arrangement or because the town expects it. I'm asking because somewhere between you arriving in that burgundy dress and me waking up to find you'd ridden through hell to find me, I went and did the one thing I swore I wouldn't do again." Ruby's hand stilled. "Which is? Fell in love." The words came out rough, unpracticed. "I don't know how to court you proper. Ruby, don't have pretty words or promises of an easy life. All I've got is a ranch that needs constant work, a town that might never fully accept you, and a man who's been broken and mended wrong. But if you'll have me, I'll spend whatever time we've got trying to deserve you." Ruby looked at him. This complicated, difficult, wonderful man who'd seen her worst truths and offered his heart anyway. "You infuriating fool," she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, of course, yes." Wade pulled her down for a kiss that was awkward with his injuries but perfect in every way that mattered. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he was grinning like a boy. "Tom's gonna say I told you so. He said, Tom's a wise man." Ruby settled carefully beside him on the narrow bunk. "We should probably listen to him more often." "Probably," Wade agreed, pulling her close with his good arm. "But where's the fun in that?" The doctor arrived that afternoon. Confirming what Ruby already knew, Wade would recover fully, though the arm would take weeks to heal properly. They made the journey back to the ranch slowly, Wade riding double with Ruby despite his protests about propriety. Word had already spread through the territory, as it always did. The dramatic rescue, Ruby's desperate ride through the storm, Wade's near-death experience. It was the kind of story that grew in the telling. By the time they reached the ranch, half the county seemed to be waiting in the yard. "Heard congratulations are in order," Sheriff Coleman said, tipping his hat to Ruby. About time Wade came to his senses. Eleanor Morrison was there too, her usual sour expression replaced by something almost like respect. "Miss Dawson showed real grit," she announced to anyone listening. "Not many women would ride through that storm. Perhaps I was hasty in my judgments." It was as close to an apology as Ruby was likely to get, and she accepted it gracefully. The crowd gradually dispersed, leaving them to the quiet of their home. Their home. Ruby realized with a start, somewhere between arrival and now. She'd stopped thinking of it as Wade's ranch and started thinking of it as theirs. That night, as she helped Wade settle into his own bed, he caught her hand. "There's one more thing. About Dunn." Ruby tensed. "What about him?" "I sent word to a friend in the Texas Rangers. Turns out Mr. Dunn is wanted in 3 states for various schemes. They'll be real interested to know where he might be found. You don't have to protect me, Wade. I can handle my own problems." "I know you can, but you don't have to anymore. That's what marriage means, facing things together." Ruby bent to kiss him, careful of his injuries. "Together," she agreed. "I like the sound of that." As she turned to go, Wade called her back. "Stay?" It was a question, not a demand. Ruby considered for a moment, then smiled. "Let me get my night things." "To hell with propriety." Wade growled. "We're engaged now." "And you're injured? Nothing improper is happening tonight, Mr. Thatcher." "Tomorrow, then?" "We'll see." Ruby laughed, the sound bright as morning. "We'll see." She did stay, curled carefully against his good side, listening to his breathing even out into sleep. Outside, the night was clear and full of stars, the storm's violence already fading into memory. But inside, in the warmth of Wade's arms, Ruby finally understood what home meant. It wasn't a place or a building or even safety from the past. It was this, being known, being chosen, being loved despite everything. It was Wade's steady heartbeat under her palm and the promise of tomorrow stretching bright before them. Whatever came next, Virgil's threats, the town's gossip, the challenges of building a life together, they'd face it as one. No more running, no more hiding, no more lies between them. Just truth and love, and the kind of courage it took to trust another person with your whole heart. Ruby smiled against Wade's shoulder. She'd come west looking for escape and found something so much better, a future worth fighting for and a man worth loving. And if that wasn't a happy ending worth every mile and every tear, she didn't know what was. 2 weeks had passed since the storm, and Wade's arm was healing well enough that he'd grown restless with inactivity. Ruby found him in the barn one morning, attempting to saddle Tempest one-handed and cursing creatively when the stallion sidestepped. "You're going to tear those stitches," she warned from the doorway. "I've got ranch work needs doing," Wade grumbled, but he stepped back from the horse. "Can't run this place from a rocking chair. Tom's handling things fine. What you need is rest." Ruby moved closer, noting the tension in his shoulders. "This isn't just about ranch work, is it?" Wade's jaw tightened. "Got word from town. Virgil Dunn's been seen at the hotel, spreading his poison to anyone who'll listen." Ruby's stomach clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "Let him talk. Sheriff Coleman knows the truth." "It's not the sheriff I'm worried about. It's—" Wade cut himself off as Tom appeared in the barn entrance, his weathered face grim. "Boss, we got company coming. That Dunn fellow, and he ain't alone. Brought 2 rough-looking characters with him." Ruby felt Wade tense beside her, his good hand moving instinctively toward where his gun belt usually hung. "How far out?" "Maybe 10 minutes. Want me to gather the boys?" "Do it, but keep it calm. Don't want shooting unless they start it." Wade turned to Ruby. "Get in the house." "No?" Ruby lifted her chin. "This is my fight, too. Ruby, we face things together. Remember? Your words? Wade Thatcher." He looked ready to argue, then nodded curtly. "Stay behind me. Then, and if shooting starts, you hit the ground and crawl for cover. No heroics." They positioned themselves on the porch, Wade standing tall despite his bound arm, Ruby slightly behind but visible. Tom and the hands spread out across the yard, casual seeming but ready. The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the dusty ground. Virgil Dunn rode in like he owned the place, flanked by 2 men who had "hired gun" written in every line of their bodies. He dismounted with theatrical flair, making a show of adjusting his coat and checking his pocket watch. "Morning, Thatcher, Miss Dawson." His smile was all teeth and malice. "Beautiful day for settling debts, wouldn't you say? State your business and get out," Wade said flatly. "My business?" Virgil laughed. "My business is justice. You see, I've been doing some thinking since our last conversation. That unfortunate incident with your fist made me realize I've been going about this all wrong." He reached into his coat, and every hand in the yard tensed. But he pulled out only a folded paper, waving it like a flag. "Telegraph from New Orleans. Seems the police there are very interested in locating one Ruby Mae Dawson in connection with a murder. I took the liberty of informing them where she might be found." Ruby felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, Wade remained perfectly still, but she could feel the fury radiating from him. "Of course," Virgil continued. "Telegraphs can be lost, wires can be cut, information can be forgotten for the right price. You already named your price," Wade said. "The answer's still no." "That was before you assaulted me? The price has gone up, $10,000, and I disappear forever." "You're out of your mind." Virgil's expression hardened. "I'm a desperate man. Thatcher, you have no idea what I'm running from back east. 10,000, or your precious Ruby hangs for murder. Simple as that." "There's another option," a new voice called out. Sheriff Coleman emerged from behind the barn, accompanied by a man Ruby didn't recognize. Tall, lean, with the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. "Virgil Dunn, you're under arrest." Virgil spun, his hand moving toward his weapon. His hired guns were faster, leather clearing and iron filling their hands. But Wade was ready, shoving Ruby down with his good arm as he dove for cover. The gunfight was brief but vicious. Tom and the ranch hands opened fire from their positions, catching the gunman in a crossfire. One went down immediately, clutching his shoulder. The other managed to get off several shots before Miguel's rifle found its mark. Virgil himself never cleared leather. The stranger with Sheriff Coleman had his weapon out and aimed before Virgil could blink. "Texas Rangers," the man announced calmly. "Drop the iron. Done, or I'll drop you." Virgil's face cycled through rage, disbelief, and finally, defeat. His pistol fell to the dust. You can't arrest me. I've done nothing wrong here. Maybe not here, the ranger agreed. But there's the matter of a bank robbery in Austin, a confidence scheme in San Antonio, and a particularly nasty situation with a judge's wife in Houston. You've been a busy man, Mr. Dunn. As the sheriff and his men secured the prisoners, Wade helped Ruby to her feet. She was shaking, adrenaline and relief warring in her system. It's over, Wade said softly. He can't hurt you anymore. But the ranger was approaching, his expression neutral but not unkind. Ma'am, I'm Captain Ben Morrison. I need to ask you about New Orleans. Ruby's heart sank. She'd known this moment would come, had prepared for it, but that didn't make it easier. What do you want to know? The truth would be a good start. Morrison studied her with sharp eyes. Dunn's been singing like a bird, trying to trade information for leniency. Says you were witness to a murder. I was. Ruby lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. Marcus Beaumont was killed by Virgil Dunn in the office of the Gilded Rose. I saw it happen. Morrison nodded slowly. That matches what we've heard from other sources. Seems Mr. Beaumont was police informant, gathering evidence about illegal activities in the sporting houses. His death set back a major investigation. Ruby blinked. Marcus was... what? You didn't know? Morrison's expression softened slightly. Beaumont was working undercover. When Dunn killed him, it wasn't just murder. It was killing a lawman in the performance of his duties. That's a hanging offense for certain. The world seemed to tilt. All this time, Ruby had carried the guilt of not trying to save a criminal. But Marcus had been trying to do right, trying to clean up the very corruption that had trapped her there. Will I... Ruby swallowed hard. Will I need to go back to testify? Morrison and Coleman exchanged glances. That depends, the ranger said carefully. On what kind of deal the prosecutor wants to make. Your testimony could seal Dunn's fate, but... He looked at Wade, then back to Ruby. Sometimes witnesses disappear in the frontier. Terrible thing. How unreliable the mail can be out here. Why, a subpoena could take months to find someone, if it ever did. The meaning was clear. Ruby sagged against Wade, relief making her knees weak. Thank you, Wade said quietly. Both of you. Coleman touched his hat brim. Just doing our job, though I'd appreciate if folks could keep the gunfights to a minimum. I'm getting too old for this much excitement. As the lawmen led their prisoners away, Ruby found herself surrounded by the ranch hands, all checking that she was unharmed, their acceptance, earned through weeks of hard work and shared trials, meant more than she could express. Well, Tom said finally, that was more fuss than we usually see before lunch. Reckon we all deserve the rest of the day off. Wade started to protest, then caught Ruby's eye and smiled. Reckon you're right. Tom, boys, take the afternoon. We'll start fresh tomorrow. As the hands dispersed, chattering excitedly about the morning's events, Wade and Ruby were left alone on the porch. The sun was high now, warming the boards beneath their feet. You all right? Wade asked, turning her to face him. I think so. It's just... all this time, I thought I was protecting a criminal's killer, but Marcus was trying to help people. Tears pricked her eyes. I should have tried to stop it. Should have done something. Against an armed man. You would have died too, and Dunn would have gotten away with it all. Wade cupped her face with his good hand. You survived, Ruby, and because you survived, you can tell the truth about what happened. That's its own kind of justice. She leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his presence. Do you think Morrison meant it? About the subpoena getting lost? Ben Morrison's a good man. If he says something might happen, it generally does. Wade's thumb stroked her cheek. Besides, you're about to be a respectable married woman. Ruby Thatcher has no connection to whatever happened in New Orleans. Ruby Thatcher, she repeated, tasting the name. I like the sound of that. Good, because I've been thinking. No reason to wait for my arm to heal completely. We could ride to town tomorrow. Have Reverend Palmer do the ceremony? Ruby pulled back to study his face. Tomorrow? That's awfully sudden. We've wasted enough time. Don't you think? Wade's expression was serious now. I almost died out there in that canyon. Ruby made me realize how precious time is. How foolish it is to delay happiness because of what people might think or say. What will people think? The proper mourning period. To hell with proper... The vehemence in Wade's voice surprised them both. I mourned Martha for 2 years, honored her memory, kept her things just as she left them. But she's gone, and I'm still here. We're still here. And I think she'd want me to grab happiness with both hands, even if one of them is broken. Ruby laughed, the sound watery with unshed tears. Tomorrow, then, though I should warn you, I don't have a proper wedding dress. Wear the amber silk, Wade suggested. You looked beautiful in it at the festival. That was for showing off, for proving a point. Then prove another point. Show them that Ruby Thatcher isn't afraid of anything, least of all their opinions. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations. Mary Sullivan, when told the news, immediately took charge of organizing a small reception at the bakery. Nothing fancy, she promised. Just cake and well wishes from the folks who matter. Ruby spent the evening altering the amber dress, adding new trim from fabric she'd bought weeks ago but never used. Wade found her there as the sun set, squinting over her needlework in the lamplight. Second thoughts? He asked from the doorway. No. Ruby set down the needle, flexing her cramped fingers. Just wanting to get it right. A woman only gets married once. Twice, in my case, Wade reminded her, coming to sit beside her. Ruby, I need you to know something. I loved Martha. Part of me always will. But what I feel for you, it's different. Not more or less. Just different. I know. Ruby took his hand, careful of his healing injuries. I'm not trying to replace her. Wade, I couldn't even if I wanted to. I just want to make my own place here. With you. You already have. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. The house feels alive again. The hands smile more. Even Tom's less grumpy, though he'd deny it if asked. And you? Ruby asked softly. What do I bring to your life? Wade Thatcher. He was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words with care. Fire, he said finally. You bring fire. Martha was gentle rain, soothing and necessary, but you're the lightning that sets the prairie ablaze, making room for new growth. You challenge me, infuriate me, make me feel things I thought were buried with her. Is that good? It's life, Wade said simply. And I choose life, choose you, today, tomorrow, and all the days after. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, vows to speak, a life to build, perhaps lingering whispers from those who would never fully accept them. But tonight, they had this, the quiet certainty of two people who'd found each other against all odds. I should go, Wade said eventually. Tom insists it's bad luck to see the bride the night before the wedding. Tom's getting sentimental in his old age. Ruby teased, but she didn't protest as Wade rose to leave. At the door, he turned back. Ruby, wear your hair down tomorrow. I like it best that way. She smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. Down it is. The door closed behind him, leaving Ruby alone with her thoughts and her sewing. She picked up the needle again, adding the final touches to the dress that would see her married. Not the innocent white of a first bride, but amber silk that caught the light like flame. It was fitting, she thought. She wasn't innocent, wasn't starting fresh. She was building something new from the ashes of what came before. Tomorrow, she would walk down the aisle of the small church where Martha had once stood. She would speak vows to the man who'd loved another first and completely. She would become Ruby Thatcher, rancher's wife, respected woman, beloved partner. It shouldn't work, By all logic, by every convention of society and propriety, their union was doomed. But as Ruby held up the finished dress, admiring how the lamplight caught the silk, she felt nothing but certainty. They were two survivors building a life from broken pieces. It wouldn't be perfect or easy or without its sorrows, but it would be theirs, forged in truth and tested by fire. And that, Ruby thought as she carefully hung the dress for tomorrow, was more than enough. It was everything. The morning after their wedding dawned with unseasonable cold, frost glittering on the fence posts like nature's congratulations. Ruby woke in Wade's arms for the first time as his wife, the simple gold band on her finger catching the early light. The ceremony had been small but perfect, just their closest friends. Mary Sullivan's cake, and vows spoken with the weight of truth behind them. But their honeymoon period was short-lived. By noon, Tom was at the door with troubling news. "Boss, we got problems. Henderson's pulled his contract for beef. Says he can't do business with folks who harbor criminals." Wade's face darkened. "Henderson's been buying from us for 5 years. "Yes, sir, but his wife's cousin to Eleanor Morrison. And you know how that goes." Ruby felt the familiar twist of guilt in her stomach. "This is because of me, because of what Virgil said. This is because Henderson's a coward," Wade corrected firmly. But Ruby could see the worry in his eyes. The ranch operated on the thin margins. Losing a major buyer could spell disaster. Over the following days, the situation worsened. 2 more buyers withdrew their contracts. The feed store suddenly had credit issues when Wade tried to purchase winter supplies. Even the bank manager, always friendly before, turned cold and formal when they came to town. "We'll manage." Wade insisted that night over a dinner of beans and cornbread, simpler fare than usual. Ruby noticed. "I've got savings. Savings you were planning to use for breeding stock," Ruby pointed out. "Wade, this is my fault. Maybe if I left—" "Don't!" His voice was sharp enough to cut. "Don't even think it. You're my wife now, for better or worse. This seems decidedly on the worse side." Wade reached across the table to take her hand. "We'll find a way through. We always do." But finding a way proved harder than either anticipated. By the end of the week, they'd lost another contract, and the remaining cowboys were getting nervous about their winter wages. Ruby overheard Miguel and Charlie talking in the barn. "Maybe it's time to move on," Charlie was saying. "Heard the Double Bar is hiring? You'd leave?" Miguel sounded shocked. "After all, mister, Wade's done for us. Man's got to eat, and if the ranch goes under—" Ruby slipped away before they could spot her, her mind racing. She'd brought this disaster on them all, and she had to find a way to fix it. The idea came to her that night as she was going through her recipe box, a wedding gift from Mary Sullivan filled with local favorites. If the established businesses wouldn't deal with them, maybe she could create a new one. "What if we opened a restaurant?" she said suddenly, causing Wade to look up from the ledgers he'd been frowning over. "A restaurant?" "Not in town, here, at the ranch. A dining room for travelers on the stage route. Mary says the nearest decent meal is 50 miles in either direction. We could offer good food, clean beds, fresh horses." Wade set down his pencil, considering, "That's not a terrible idea, but it would take money to set up, and we're already stretched thin. I have some jewelry left, things I brought from New Orleans." Ruby had kept them hidden, remnants of her old life, but sentiment was a luxury they couldn't afford. They should bring enough to get started. "Ruby, no, those are yours." "What's mine is yours now, remember?" She moved to stand behind his chair, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "Besides, I'd rather invest in our future than cling to the past." They spent the next hour planning, the ledgers forgotten as they sketched out possibilities. The old bunkhouse could be converted to guest rooms. The summer kitchen, rarely used now, could be expanded. Ruby's confidence grew with each detail. "We'll need help," Wade pointed out. "Can't run a restaurant and a ranch with just our current hands." "I know someone," Ruby said slowly. "There was a girl in New Orleans, Josephine, a freed woman who cooked like an angel. Last I heard, she was looking to come west. You'd trust her, given where you knew her from? I'd trust her with my life. She kept her mouth shut when it mattered, and she works harder than any two people I know. Wade nodded slowly. Write to her, then see if she's interested. As Ruby penned the letter the next morning, she felt the first stirring of real hope. Maybe they couldn't change the town's mind about her past, but they could build something new despite it. The response to their plans was mixed. Tom thought they'd lost their minds. Turning a working ranch into some kind of hotel? What would your daddy think, boss? My daddy's dead, Wade replied evenly. And he always said a smart man changes with the times or gets left behind. Mary Sullivan, on the other hand, was enthusiastic. It's brilliant. I could supply the bread and pastries. Oh, and you'll need good linens. I know just the person. Even some of the ranch hands warmed to the idea, especially when Ruby explained they'd need more help, not less. Guests mean horses to tend, grounds to keep, wood to chop, she pointed out. Your jobs are safe. The jewelry brought less than Ruby had hoped, but more than Wade had expected. Combined with what savings they could spare, it was enough to begin renovations. Wade threw himself into the physical work, his arm finally healed enough for real labor. Ruby coordinated supplies, planned menus, and slowly won over the local suppliers who'd been hesitant to deal with them. You can't boycott the only restaurant for 50 miles, she told Silas Murphy, who ran the vegetable farm outside town. Not if you want travelers to know about your produce. 3 weeks into the project, Josephine arrived. Ruby had worried how the townspeople would react to a colored woman at the ranch, but Josephine took one look at the suspicious faces and announced, I cook better than anyone in 3 states, and I don't suffer fools. You got a problem with that? Her confidence, combined with the heavenly smells that soon wafted from the kitchen, won over even the skeptics. Tom, who'd grumbled constantly about the changes, was caught sneaking thirds of her trial batch of fried chicken. The work was hard. Harder than anything Ruby had done before. She fell into bed exhausted each night, her hands rough from scrubbing and painting, her back aching from hauling furniture. But there was satisfaction in it, too, in watching something grow from nothing but determination and sweat. Wade worked beside her, and in those long days, their partnership deepened. They learned each other's rhythms, communicated without words, moved together like dancers who'd found their perfect match. When Ruby's confidence faltered, Wade steadied her. When his temper flared at some setback, she soothed him. Eleanor Morrison came by one afternoon while Ruby was whitewashing the dining room walls. She stood in the doorway, her usual severe expression tinged with something that might have been curiosity. I hear you're opening a restaurant, she said without preamble. A dining establishment for travelers. Yes. Ruby kept painting, refusing to be intimidated. And you think people will come? Knowing what you are? Ruby set down her brush and turned to face the woman who'd made her life difficult from the start. What am I, Mrs. Morrison? I'm a woman who made mistakes, who survived terrible things, who chose to build something better rather than wallow in the past. I am a wife who loves her husband and works beside him. I'm a neighbor who pays her debts and helps where she can. If that's not enough for you, then that's your loss, not mine. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, her stern face softened slightly. My eldest daughter, the one who ran off with the photographer, she wrote last month, they're doing well in California. Happy. She paused. I was wrong to judge her so harshly. Perhaps I've been wrong about other things too. It wasn't an apology. Not quite, but it was a crack in the wall of hostility. Ruby nodded, understanding the effort it had taken. Your daughter sounds brave. You should be proud. Perhaps. Eleanor turned to go, then looked back. That chicken I smell, is it for sale? Not yet, but Josephine's testing recipes for the menu. I could have her set aside a portion for you to try. I would appreciate that. After Eleanor left with a basket of chicken and biscuits, Josephine emerged from the kitchen, eyebrows raised. That the dragon lady you told me about? The very same. Huh. Dragons got to eat too. I suppose. Josephine grinned, though I might have added extra pepper to hers, just a little. The restaurant, they'd decided to call it simply the Rocking Tea Inn, opened on a Tuesday in November. Ruby had wanted to wait until everything was perfect, but Wade pointed out that perfection was a luxury they couldn't afford. Better to start small and grow, he said, surveying the transformed space. The dining room could seat 20, with white cloths on the tables and wildflowers in mason jars for centerpieces. Simple but clean, welcoming without being pretentious. Their first customer was a traveling salesman whose usual stop had closed after the owner took ill. He seemed skeptical at first, but after Josephine's roast beef and Ruby's apple pie, he was effusive with praise. "Best meal I've had in months," he declared, paying his bill. "I'll be sure to tell others on the route." Word spread as travelers do best, through gossip and recommendation. By the end of the first week, they were serving a dozen meals a day. By the end of the month, people were planning their travel schedules around dinner at the Rocking Tea. Not everyone was pleased with their success. Henderson, who'd started the boycott, came by one evening when the dining room was full of satisfied customers. "Quite the operation," he said grudgingly to Wade. "Shame you had to give up honest ranching for this." Wade's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, one of the diners, a well-dressed gentleman from Austin, spoke up. "Excuse me, but are you disparaging this establishment? Because I'll have you know I've eaten in the finest restaurants in Texas. And Mrs. Thatcher's hospitality ranks among the best. Any man who can't see quality when it's in front of him is a fool." Henderson flushed and left without ordering. Ruby caught Wade's eye across the room and smiled. They might have lost some battles, but they were winning the war. Winter arrived with brutal force, but the inn stayed busy. Travelers were grateful for warm food and warmer beds, and the ranch hands adapted to their new roles with surprising grace. Charlie, who'd talked of leaving, became their best stable manager, ensuring guest horses were well tended. Miguel discovered a talent for hospitality, charming even the surliest travelers. One snowy evening, as Ruby was serving dinner to a full dining room, she noticed Wade watching from the doorway. His expression was soft, almost wondering. Later, as they cleaned up together, they always did the last tasks themselves, a quiet ritual they'd developed. He pulled her close. "What?" she asked, seeing emotion in his eyes she couldn't quite read. "Just thinking," he said slowly, "how different this is from what I planned. I wanted a young, biddable wife to give me sons and keep quiet. Instead, I got a force of nature who turned my whole life upside down." "Regrets?" Ruby asked, though she was smiling. "Not one." He kissed her deeply, there in their kitchen that smelled of good food and success. "Though I do wonder what you'll decide to change next." "Well," Ruby said thoughtfully, "I have been thinking about adding a small store. Travelers always need supplies, and if we're already established—" Wade groaned in mock dismay. "I've created a monster." "An enterprising monster," Ruby corrected, "who loves you very much." "And who I love," Wade said, the words still new enough to carry weight. "More than I ever thought possible." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, but inside the Rocking Tea Inn, warmth and light prevailed. They'd built this together, not just a business, but a life, a future, a place where even the most damaged souls could find redemption. Ruby looked around the kitchen where she'd learned to cook, fought to belong, discovered strength she didn't know she possessed. 6 months ago, she'd arrived as a desperate woman running from her past. Now she was Ruby Thatcher, businesswoman, wife, and vital part of a community that was slowly learning to accept her. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd answered that advertisement. It was harder, more complex, more real than any fantasy. But it was hers, earned with every blister, every sleepless night, every small victory over prejudice and circumstance. "Ready for bed?" Wade asked, banking the fire in the stove. In a moment, Ruby moved to the window, looking out at their kingdom of snow and starlight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new guests, new opportunities. But tonight, she was simply grateful. She'd come west seeking escape and found herself instead. Found love, found purpose, found the courage to stop running and start building. And if that wasn't worth every trial they'd faced, nothing was. Wade joined her at the window, solid and warm at her back. Together they watched the snow fall, transforming the familiar landscape into something magical and new. Like their life together, Ruby thought. Taking something ordinary and making it extraordinary through sheer force of will and love. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing past the lies to who I really was. For giving me a chance when no one else would. For being brave enough to change your plans." Wade turned her in his arms, tilting her face up to his. "Thank you," he countered. "For being impossible. For refusing to be what I thought I wanted. For saving me from a life half lived." They stood there in the warm kitchen of their imperfect, thriving inn. Two souls who'd found each other against all odds. Outside, the Texas winter raged. But inside, all was peace and possibility, and the promise of spring to come. Spring arrived with a vengeance that year, bringing torrential rains that turned the roads to mud and tested the new roof on the inn. But it also brought wildflowers in abundance, carpeting the prairie in purple and gold. And with them came the promise of new beginnings. Ruby stood on the porch of their home, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of rose and amber. The simple gold band on her finger had worn smooth with daily work, and her hands, once soft from city living, now bore the calluses of honest labor. But it was her heart that had changed the most. No longer running, no longer hiding, finally at peace. "You're up early," Wade said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee, the steam rising between them in the cool morning air. "Couldn't sleep. Too much planning to do." Ruby accepted the cup gratefully. "The Cattlemen's Association meeting is next week. If we can convince them to hold their summer gathering here, it would establish us as more than just a way station." Wade finished. Smart thinking, Mrs. Thatcher. The title still sent a warm thrill through her. They'd been married 4 months now, and every day had brought new challenges and new joys. The inn was thriving beyond their wildest hopes, and even the ranch operations had stabilized with the additional income. "I've been thinking," Wade said slowly, "about what you said that night, about children." Ruby's hand stilled on her coffee cup. It was a subject they danced around since their wedding, both afraid to voice hopes that might be dashed. What about them? Just that, if it happens, and if it doesn't... He turned to face her, his expression serious. "You're enough, Ruby. This life we've built, it's enough. I need you to know that." Tears pricked her eyes. "Wade Thatcher, when did you become such a romantic?" "Must be your influence," he said, pulling her close. "Though don't tell Tom. He already thinks I've gone soft." They were interrupted by the arrival of a wagon, earlier than their usual guests. But as it drew closer, Ruby recognized the driver, Reverend Palmer, and beside him sat a woman she'd never seen before, clutching a small bundle. "Reverend," Wade called out, "you're out early." The minister's face was grave as he helped the woman down. She was young, perhaps 20, with the hollow eyes of someone who'd seen too much. The bundle in her arms whimpered. A baby, Ruby realized, probably no more than a few months old. "Wade, Mrs. Thatcher," the Reverend said formally. "This is Sarah Jennings. She's in need of assistance." Sarah's story came out in halting pieces over breakfast. Her husband had died in a mining accident, leaving her with nothing but debts and a baby to feed. She'd tried to make it on her own, taking in washing, but it wasn't enough. The church had been helping, but their resources were limited. "I can work," Sarah said desperately, bouncing the fussing baby. "I'm strong. I can clean, cook some. I need a chance." Ruby exchanged glances with Wade. They'd been talking about hiring more help as the inn grew, but taking on a widow with a baby was different from hiring single workers. The old foreman's cottage, Ruby said suddenly. It's been empty since Tom moved to the new bunkhouse. With some fixing up? Ruby, Wade said quietly. Are you sure? She thought of her own desperate flight, of arriving at this ranch with nothing but lies and hope. Everyone deserves a second chance, she said firmly. Isn't that what you taught me? Sarah burst into tears. You mean you'll help us? We'll do more than help, Ruby declared. We'll give you work and a home. The baby can stay in the kitchen with Josephine during service hours. She loves children, and when things are quiet, well, I could use help with the mending and such. Watching Sarah's face transform with hope, Ruby felt something shift inside her chest. This was what they'd built. Not just a business, but a place of refuge for those who needed it most. The spring days grew longer and busier. Sarah proved to be a hard worker, grateful for the chance and determined to earn her keep. Her baby, little Emma, became the inn's unofficial mascot, charming even the gruffest travelers with her gummy smiles. It was Tom who noticed first. You're looking peaked lately, he told Ruby one morning as she struggled with a wave of dizziness while collecting eggs. Just tired, she insisted, but the knowing look in his weathered eyes made her wonder. The truth came clear a week later when the smell of bacon sent her running for the wash basin. Josephine found her there, pale and shaking. How long? The older woman asked simply. I don't know. A month? Maybe 2? I didn't want to hope. Josephine's face split into a broad grin. Hope's got nothing to do with it. Honey, that's a baby making itself known, sure as sunrise. Ruby's hand went to her still flat stomach, wonder and terror warring in her chest. A baby. After all the years of careful prevention in New Orleans, after thinking that part of her life was closed forever, she was going to have Wade's child. She found him in the corral, working with a new colt. He looked up at her approach, and something in her face made him hand the lead rope to Miguel and vault over the fence. What's wrong? Are you ill? Not ill, Ruby said, taking his hands. Wade, there's going to be a baby. The transformation of his face was something she'd remember forever. Joy, wonder, and a flash of fear all passed through his eyes before he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet. A baby. He breathed against her hair. Our baby. You're not scared? Terrified, he admitted, setting her down gently. But happy. So happy I could burst. News traveled fast in their small community. Mary Sullivan arrived that afternoon with advice and knitted blankets. Eleanor Morrison, in what had become her weekly ritual, brought a pot of soup and her own brand of stern support. You'll need to be careful, she advised. First babies after 30 can be tricky, but you're strong. You'll do fine. Even the ranch hands got into the spirit, with Charlie starting a betting pool on whether it would be a boy or girl. Tom just smiled his knowing smile and began working on a cradle in his spare time. The summer passed in a blur of growth, both the inn's reputation and Ruby's waistline. They hosted the Cattlemen's Association meeting to great success, with several members booking future events. The garden produced abundantly, and Sarah's quiet efficiency freed Ruby to rest when needed. But it was the quiet moments Ruby treasured most. Evenings on the porch with Wade, his hand resting on her growing belly, mornings when the baby would kick, and Wade's face would light with wonder. The night he'd talk to her stomach for an hour, telling the baby about the ranch, the horses, all the things they'd do together. Getting ahead of yourself, Ruby had teased. What if she wants to be a dancer in Paris? Then I'll learn French, Wade had replied seriously, making her love him even more. August came with its brutal heat, and Ruby found movement increasingly difficult. But there was work to be done. The inn didn't run itself, and harvest preparations were in full swing. She was in the kitchen, supervising the canning of peaches, when the first pain struck. Just a cramp, she told Josephine, but the older woman's eyes narrowed. How many cramps? A few, since morning. Lord have mercy. Sarah, Josephine called. Ride for the doctor. Tell him it's time. What followed were the longest hours of Ruby's life. The doctor arrived to find her walking the floor, Wade at her side, his face pale but determined. Mary Sullivan came, and Eleanor Morrison, and even Tom poked his head in before being chased away by the women. "You're doing fine," the doctor assured her. But Ruby felt anything but fine. The pain was overwhelming, and fear crept in with each wave. What if something went wrong? What if she was too old, too damaged by her past life? What if— "Look at me," Wade commanded, his face close to hers. "You're the strongest woman I know. You survived New Orleans. You survived Virgil Dunn. You survived this whole damn town's judgment. You can survive this." "What if I can't? What if—" "Then we'll face it together. But you can. I know you can." Hours passed. The sun set and rose again. And then, just as the morning light painted the room golden, a new voice joined the world, strong and clear and perfect. "A son," the doctor announced, placing the squalling bundle in Ruby's arms. "Healthy and loud as his mama." Ruby looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely beautiful. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to your crazy, wonderful life." Wade's hand shook as he touched the baby's head, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "He's perfect." "You're perfect. God, Ruby, I love you so much." They named him William Thomas Thatcher, William for Wade's father, and Thomas for the man who'd become a grandfather to them all. Tom pretended the gesture didn't affect him, but Ruby caught him wiping his eyes when he thought no one was looking. The baptism was held on a perfect September Sunday. The church was packed, with even those who'd once shunned Ruby coming to wish them well. As Reverend Palmer spoke the ancient words, Ruby looked around at their gathered family, for that's what they'd become. Josephine and Sarah, Tom and the ranch hands, Mary Sullivan, and yes, even Eleanor Morrison, all united in celebrating new life and new hope. That evening, as the inn settled into quiet and their guests retired, Ruby found Wade in the nursery they'd created from her old room. He was in the rocking chair Tom had made, William sleeping peacefully in his arms. "Counting your blessings?" she asked softly. "Something like that." He looked up at her, and the love in his eyes took her breath away. "A year ago, I was a bitter man advertising for a wife like ordering cattle. Now look at us. A family, a real family." Ruby perched on the arm of the chair, looking down at their son. "No regrets about the young, biddable wife. That wife would have given me exactly what I thought I wanted. A quiet life with no surprises." He reached up to touch her cheek. "You gave me what I needed. A life worth living. Even with all the trouble I brought. Especially with that. You taught me that the best things in life are worth fighting for." William stirred, making the soft sounds that meant he'd be hungry soon. Ruby took him, settling into the familiar rhythm of motherhood that still amazed her. As she nursed their son, Wade wrapped his arms around them both, creating a circle of love and protection. Outside their window, the Rocking T Ranch stretched out under the stars, the cattle in the pastures, the inn full of satisfied guests, the garden ready for harvest. It was an empire built on second chances and stubborn determination, on love that chose to see past surfaces to the truth beneath. "What are you thinking?" Wade asked. Ruby smiled, remembering another night, another question about her thoughts. So much had changed since then. She'd arrived as Ruby Mae Dawson, desperate and lying, carrying secrets like stones. Now she was Ruby Thatcher, wife, mother, businesswoman, respected member of a community that had learned to look past judgment to justice. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that sometimes the best stories are the ones we never plan to write, the ones that start with mistakes and end with miracles. Is that what we are? A miracle? Look around. Wade, look at what we've built from ashes and determination. If that's not a miracle, I don't know what is." He kissed her then, careful not to disturb William. And in that kiss was every promise they'd made and kept, every challenge they'd overcome, every joy they'd shared. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I love you, Ruby Thatcher," Wade said simply. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after. And I love you." Ruby replied, "For seeing past the fire to the woman who needed to be saved, and for being brave enough to let me save you too." As if in agreement, William gurgled contentedly, and they laughed together in the warm light of home. Outside, the Texas night stretched vast and full of possibilities. But inside, in this room built by love and furnished with hope, they had everything they needed. The girl who'd fled New Orleans in shame had become a woman who stood tall in Texas sunshine. The man who'd wanted a simple transaction had discovered a complex, magnificent love. Together, they'd written a story of redemption that no mail-order advertisement could have predicted. And this, Ruby thought as she rocked her son while her husband held them both, this was just the beginning. Their story would continue with each sunrise, each challenge met, each choice to love despite the odds. It would be written in William's first steps, in the success of their inn, in the lives they touched with their unlikely example. But tonight, in this perfect moment, they simply held each other and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From desperate advertisement to lasting love, from secrets and lies to truth and trust, from two broken people to one whole family. The fire that Ruby had warned Wade about hadn't destroyed them. Instead, it had forged them into something stronger, purer, more beautiful than either could have imagined. And in the warmth of that fire, they'd built a life worth living and a love worth fighting for. As the moon rose over the rocking tea ranch, casting silver light through the window, Ruby closed her eyes and offered a prayer of gratitude for second chances and stubborn hearts, for a man who saw past her sins to her soul, for a community that learned to embrace rather than exile, and for this child who represented all their hopes for the future. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight they were simply the Thatchers, Wade, Ruby, and William, a family born of unlikely beginnings and sustained by unshakable love. And that, Ruby knew with bone-deep certainty, was exactly as it should be. In the distance, a coyote howled, and its mate answered. Ruby smiled, remembering another night when she'd thought that even predators needed companionship. Now she knew the truth. Everyone needed someone to stand with them against the darkness. She'd found hers, and he'd found his. And together they'd made something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. The baby sighed in his sleep, and Wade began to hum softly, an old lullaby Martha had loved. Ruby joined in, their voices blending in the quiet room, past and present woven together into something new and precious. This was their song now, their story. Their happily ever after earned one difficult day at a time, and it was more than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, redemption, and second chances in the Wild West. I hope Ruby and Wade's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while telling it. Where are you listening from today? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more passionate tales of frontier love and adventure. What did you think of Ruby's transformation from desperate runaway to respected businesswoman and mother? Share your thoughts below.